Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to bring you a recommendation video of religious themed horror. And I want to start by saying that I have all the respect for those that have different religious beliefs. I come from a Catholic upbringing myself, but have definitely become more critical of traditional institutions as I've gotten older. But I actually really enjoy horror that involves themes surrounding religion, and so I have some really good books to recommend, and I have books featuring different religions, and I have books that I think will appeal to those of you that are religious yourself, as well as those of you that are atheists or have criticisms of organized institutions like the Catholic Church. So all that being said, I hope everyone sticks around. Let's keep this really respectful and just treat this as a really good recommendation video with some great books. First, let's talk about Angel of the Underground by David Andrus, and this is a horror novella that follows a young girl who was previously in a foster program that was run by a Catholic institution. However, there were mysterious deaths that looked rather suspicious, and so the program got shut down and she's moved to live with another foster family. And this family just has a little bit of a different perspective on religion, and so it really opens her eyes to a different perspective. They're also huge horror movie buffs, and so she also is introduced to horror films. And so this is an interesting book because I think it will appeal to those of you that love horror movies, which are probably a lot of you that also read the genre. And so there's a lot of good references to it, discussions about why we like to consume horror, why we find it comforting, and how we can learn things from the genre. But at the same time, it definitely addresses some tough topics surrounding religion. But I will say that as someone, again, with a Catholic background, I did not find this book to be cutting or uncomfortable in a way that I thought was disrespectful. It certainly makes commentary on things that have definitely happened and abuses that have taken place, but I thought that it was handled very well. So I do think that this book will appeal to those of you that are religious and are not, but want to have those discussions taking place. And so I thought it was very well written, had some great horror movie references along the way, and was just overall a good story. Next, let's talk about Beneath by Christy DeMeester, and this is a story that follows an investigator who goes off to a small town to investigate a church that does snake handling. And within this town, we also follow a young girl who is going through the practices of the church, and she is about to experience her first snake handling experience. Things go wrong, she ends up getting bitten and possibly possessed. We follow the story primarily from the perspective of the journalist, and you find out right at the beginning they're very reluctant to go to this town because they have a very complicated relationship with these church and institutions themselves. And so I will say right off the bat that it's very clear that the author is here to make some really cutting commentary on institutions of religion, and you definitely have to go into that book knowing that. So if you're someone who does not like someone to criticize these institutions and just wants them to leave those conversations out of your books, this one is not going to be for you. It definitely leans on the side of criticism, but it makes some really good conversations, and this author does not hold back in everything that they want to say about that. I believe the author also draws from her own experience with the different churches, which wasn't necessarily a positive experience growing up, and so it definitely brings that personal experience to the table. And it deals with some really uncomfortable subject matter, certainly the idea of people in power abusing that, possible some sexual abuse that might be discussed on the pages, or rather will be, so be prepared for that. But this book is so smart, so cutting. It has some great feminist themes and some great conversations. So again, I would most encourage people that are looking for a book that is going to have that conversation and have those criticisms on the page. This is a book that you might really enjoy because I thought it was done in a really smart way, but it's definitely critical. So if you don't want anyone to say anything bad about the churches that are out there, this one may not be for you. But if you're looking for that, this is a great example of a horror novel that involves some religious themes into a great, scary, tight little narrative. Going in a different direction, I want to talk about The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty, and I think everyone knows the story, but essentially it is about a young girl that plays with a Ouija board, possibly becomes possessed, and then her mother seeks out help, first from the medical community, but when they cannot find answers to her daughter's strange and terrifying behavior, she eventually turns to the Catholic Church. I understand that this book was written as a callback to get Catholics to return to the church. So while this story definitely is horror and it deals with some supernatural ideas, it was written to have people consider their faith once more. And I really like this book because I feel like there's an assumption when it comes to horror and religion that they're always going to be at odds. And this book was great because, again, for someone with that background, I found this book to be very respectful. So I do feel comfortable to give this book or recommend this book to those of my friends that are very traditional Catholics that are looking to try horror but don't want anything that's going to criticize their faith, because again, I thought it was done in a very nuanced way. The Catholic priests in the story are so cool, so likable, and they are just really kick butt men, and they do what they gotta do. And I do like the fact that while this book of course addresses exorcisms, which in and of itself is a huge controversy, the fact that the Catholic Church does them and continues to do them today, so certainly that is in the story. But I do like that even the priests are looking for every single explanation before they go ahead with the exorcism. And so at least I like that they do their due diligence. I thought they would come in blazing, rushing off with their crucifixes to get the job done, but instead they were very cautious, they were very intellectual as men, and really tried to tiptoe into the situation without making any false assumptions. So I thought it presented the topic very well. I thought it was a very balanced story, and at the same time it's absolutely terrifying. So even if you're not Catholic yourself, this is just plain a classic of the genre that you really need to read. Even if you've seen the movie, I really encourage you to go back to the original source. I thought it was terrifying. The little girl says some crazy things, and I love this story. I've read it again and again, and I love it more each time I read it. And I think it is a perfect example of how horror and religion can come together to make an incredible story that is oh so powerful. Now, to go in the other direction again, I want to talk about Goddess of Filth by V. Castro, which is a horror novella that follows a group of teenagers of Mexican descent that go and have a seance. Things go wrong. One of the girls possibly becomes possessed. She begins to bleed. She says things in other languages, and then they sleep it off, and the next day they have to figure out what happened. Is their friend okay, or is she still possibly possessed? And as you would expect, eventually they start to turn to a Catholic priest to reach out and to see if she needs to be exorcised. And I will say, without saying too much, that this book takes a different perspective on the church's role in exorcisms and is just a little bit more cutting and critical of that whole relationship there. So again, if you're someone who is looking for that conversation on the page, I think that this one is done very well. It is very smart. A major thing when it comes to possession and horror stories is that you always have this female who is the victim in these stories, and I really like that this book takes the power back to the female characters. It's very feminist and smart and just plays with the tropes of possession stories and does something a little bit different. But I really like the commentary it does on the Catholic faith within here. And so again, if you're open to that, I thought it was very well done and is just a very cutting story, but in a very smart way. So I did not feel offended by it. I just thought it was really well done. Then if you're open to reading a graphic novel, I want to recommend Infidel, which is a story of a young Muslim woman who moves into a new apartment with her partner and his daughter. And of course, in moving in, there's a question of whether or not the place is possessed. But on top of that, the woman is dealing with prejudice from the neighbors that possibly do not want her there, and of course, make unfair, unsubstantiated claims and worries that she might have terrorist associations, etc. All of the stereotypes and Islamophobia that you're used to seeing, unfortunately, in this modern day. I want to recommend this one just because I do realize that my list is very Catholic and Christian centered, and so I am looking for some more diversity in this list, and I think that this one is probably one of the better examples I can give of something that involves religion that is not centered around Christianity. Christianity. And so I did really like this one. I would say as a horror story, it is really terrifying. It has fantastic artwork, which was beautifully done. And it's just a really creepy story. I'm not someone who normally likes haunted house stories, but this one leaned more into the side of psychological horror than haunted house, which works really well for me. I will admit that the story is more about the prejudice and phobias surrounding the religion rather than the religion itself, and that was kind of a side part to the story, so I would have liked to see more of how the faith is practiced just because I'm not as familiar with the details of Islam. But I think it is a great way again to bring some diversity to your reading and at the same time get a really scary story in a really nice small package. From there, I want to talk about the Merciless series by Daniel Vega, which is a horror young adult series that I really enjoy because all the stories involve either possession or exorcisms. While the first book is my favorite, I actually would not recommend it for this video because while it involves an exorcism, that exorcism is done by a bunch of teenage girls who have no training, and so it doesn't really involve much in terms of religious practices. However, I would recommend a few of the later books if you're looking for those religious overtones. In the prequel, we get a chance to see how exorcisms might be conducted in a non-Catholic Christian faith, so the story centers around Protestantism and their practices, and I thought that that was very interesting because the story was more surrounding an evangelical group, and so you get more of that style, which is a little bit less structured. And for me, again, it was very interesting because it was a little bit different than what I am familiar with. And then if you want more of the traditional Catholic style exorcism and those religious overtones, I would recommend going on to the sequel to the first book, which again follows one of the characters, I won't say who goes off to a boarding school that is run by Catholic priests and nuns. And so that one is very heavy-handed in terms of the Catholic messaging there. So again, I would recommend starting at the beginning of the series so that you don't miss or get spoiled for anything, but if you're looking for the religious tones, you do have to read further into the story. And the author kind of explores different avenues in each of the books afterwards. And finally, I can't talk about religious horror without mentioning Imaginary Friend by Stephen Chbosky. This is a piece of epic horror that is told from multiple points of view. One being a mother and her son. They are struggling both financially as well as the boy is struggling in school. One day he disappears, and when he reappears and comes back, he is changed and different, and also appears to have an imaginary friend who is whispering things to him and telling him to do certain tasks. The story is also told from the perspective of a young woman, and she has a very religious upbringing, and she is really struggling because she has a boy that she likes. She's having these sexual urges, but she wants to remain faithful to her promises of virtue and beliefs to the church. And this book, I gotta say, gets really, really heavy-handed in the Christian or specifically Catholic overtones. It gets really heavy-handed with some clear analogies of certain people being certain religious figures, and at times it kind of turns it on its head, trying to make it more imaginative or a little bit fresh. But if you do not like religion in your stories, I don't know why you're watching this video, thank you anyway, I appreciate that if you stuck around, but if you really do not like religion in your books, you may hate this one because it's super heavy-handed, and I do think it's a bit much. I really like this book, but I wish it had been toned down. But if you're gonna make a video talking about religious horror, I had to discuss this one because, like I said, the themes are in there and they are very clearly done. You will not miss them. There's no way that you can read this book and not see what the author was trying to say. And yeah, it's a lot. But if you want religious horror, this is it. So this is my recommendation for this theme video. So that is it for this video. I would love to hear of the books I mentioned. Which ones are you planning on picking up? And please recommend your own horror books that have religious themes in them as well. I would really appreciate if anyone has more diverse recommendations, because I am aware that I only covered, like I said, a small slice of religious backgrounds, and like there is no Jewish representation in this video, for example, and I would definitely love to see a proper representation in a future video if you would like to see more from me on this topic. Thank you so much for watching. If you're not subscribed, I do read a lot of horror, thriller, science fiction, fantasy. You can help me out by giving this video a thumbs up, sharing it around online, dropping a comment, even if it's just a little emoji of a cross or something like that. And if you click that little notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.